I'm Charles Goldsmith here at Judge Business School, Cambridge Judge Business School, University of Cambridge, with Professor David De Kramer, and today we're going to talk about leadership issues. The hashtag is hashtag new leadership, and I just wanted to start asking David, you've talked about how leaders do not have to do more to be effective. In fact, they can be more effective by doing less. Please explain.
Yes, okay, thank you, Charles. First of all, I want to say, I'm not going to talk about how you do nothing, so it's not about passive leadership. It's about using your energy, your abilities, your vision on how the organization should transform and the direction it should go into more effectively. And one thing that I found out in my own research is that people in leadership positions devote too much time on things they should not be focusing on. It derails them. So the derailment of leadership is a very pregnant issue, I would say. So let me start with first putting it in perspective. If we look at organizations today, what do we expect from our companies? We expect them to be sustainable, long-term view. We expect them to lead in ways that customers recognize their quality they offer, that stakeholders feel they have a trustworthy relationship with the organization. In other words, we like value-driven organizations. Values who know their purpose, what they stand for, and they live and walk the talk. That's an expectation that we have. And in today's business world, as the picture shows, I think that's quite a challenge because the pace has never been higher, expectations have never been more ambitious, and at the same time, we cannot ignore the societal and political issues as well that we're facing, which can be overpopulation, possible conflicts in different parts of the world because we have a global business world. So it is quite a challenge in today's business world. The reason why I got so interested in this is because if you go to business school, most of the models that they will introduce you are based on a rational point of view. And with the rational point of view, I mean, we look at humans, the ones who populate our organizations, as rational machines in a way. We have information, we use it, we act upon it, and it will be efficient. Unfortunately, as many of you know, that's not the case. Recently, I wrote an article on this issue. It was called 6 Traits That Predict Ethical Behavior at Work in Harvard Business Review. And it looked upon the idea of how can we make our organizations be better equipped with dealing with ethical dilemmas. Ethical dilemmas that companies are facing in terms of the production, in terms of the management of people within the company, and work with that knowledge, because that makes for a truly value-driven organization. And we identified 3 important issues. First of all, you need to be aware that something is happening. Second of all, if you're aware, do you have the intention to actually do something with the information? And thirdly, do you act upon it? And looking at that, we identified 6 types of people that are very susceptible to these 3 questions, but also very effective to these 3 questions. So the first question is, do you have awareness when it comes down to recognizing ethical dilemmas? Do you have awareness that things are not going the way it should be, and on the long term that might undermine our credibility, our trustworthiness, and hence our effectiveness? There are 2 types of personality traits people look at in that respect. Is people who are consciousness. They're very much aware of their environment in terms of values, we found out. So they are very quickly in identifying ethical dilemmas. And another trait, which we call moral attentiveness, are people who actually, not in an obsessive way, but they are very much attuned to understanding the conflicts of interest present in relationships, in teams, in organizations. So those 2 traits are very important when it comes down to selecting people if you want them to be aware of what is happening. Second step, of course, is you don't want to be aware only, you also want to have the intention to do something with it. And there we identified 2 other traits. The first one is called duty orientation. It's a relatively new developed trait that looks at how much importance people assign to their duty as an employee. You have certain duties, you have responsibilities, you've got privileges, but how do you perceive your duties to be, and how committed are you to those? So people differ in that respect. Some of them are a little bit more flexible in looking at, okay, my job will come along, I'll see what happens. Other people have a very strong framework already when it comes down to saying, like, these are my duties and I want to stick to them. So people who have a very strong duty orientation, they also have a very strong intention to work with information that may undermine the value-driven basis of an organization. Another trait was customer orientation, which is, of course, something that most of our companies like. You deal with your stakeholders very well, especially with the customers. We found that people who have a strong customer orientation, they don't only do well towards customers and will do whatever is needed for them, they're actually organizational citizens that are worried sincerely about conflicts of interest and have the intention to do something with it. So this is a very interesting finding because it makes the internal management and the external management of the company, people are looking at that. And the third step, take some action. You're aware of it, you have an intention to do it, and you take some action. Of course, assertiveness is important there. I don't need to tell anyone, I think, that you need to be a little bit assertive to put yourself out there. We also know it's not easy to voice problems. Many companies sometimes will demand okay, if you voice a problem, also propose a solution, which is not possible, so most people refrain from voicing. But you need to have some certain assertiveness. These things can be trained, by the way. So in our new leadership certificate, we also look at this. How can you be more assertive? How can you deliver feedback in a way that it's not making other people defensive, but that the information comes to the surface and that you can work with it in a way that you intend to do. And a final trait was proactivity. People want to be organizations want to be proactive, we often say. Of course, why do you want to be proactive? Because you want to see what's coming on your path, what kind of opportunities there may be in the future, and you want to take them. It will provide you a competitive advantage if you're quicker than others. But it's also important in terms of making a value-driven environment. People who are proactive, they may be more susceptible, because they are already more aware of what potential conflicts there may be. They may already be designing their work structures, the teams, if they're supervising, in proactive ways that may eliminate certain conflicts of interest. So those 6 traits, they're very important if companies want to hire people who want to voice, to build value-driven organizations. But there's a big but there. There's a reason why I introduced these findings. As I said, most business models will use a very rational approach. So a rational approach in this case means, and still too many companies think like this, when I meet, especially, for example, I met the last few weeks with CEOs from different industries, and most of the time their idea is still, oh, these are the wrong people. There's nothing wrong with the culture. So it's never a bad barrel, it's always a bad person. But if you look at it from a rational point of view, that could be the case. So then the only thing to do is hire the right people for the right job. If it's that simple, then all of us could be successful. We just need to test people, have effective and valid assessments, but it's not the case. So what is happening here? Well, because the rational point of view is limited. We quite often like to say we are rationally predictable, but we've come more and more to realize that sometimes we are irrationally predictable in the sense that we don't act as we should be. And this is also important in respect to the people that we hire and the organizations that we build. An important thing to realize is that our personality is not always predictive of our behaviors. So sometimes we will do something because of the context. So in organizations, it's not enough to just put the right people in the right job based on your assessments. It's also important to see how they deal with peer pressure, how they deal with the expectations of the job, with the cultures, with a global business setting. So systems and culture are equally important as the personality of the person you're hiring. And that's where, of course, leadership comes in more. Because if you look at the culture that we would like to achieve in today's economy, we want a culture where basically our company is called transformative. Today we're at this point, we know the future challenges, tomorrow we're at another point. Also, in that transformation process, we want to innovate. If you don't innovate, you have a status quo, you lose out. The future will not be yours. So we need a clear direction. Which direction are we going to? And what kind of value are we going to create? We need to have an understanding, and this is where the process of leadership comes in providing direction and why we need this direction. Why this direction? What's the purpose? Leaders have to embody that desire and striving of an organization. They're an embodiment of the organizational culture. And the culture is extremely important to make sure that the ones you hire for the right reasons will be performing the way you like it. But they're also extremely important for building cultures that if people don't have the right intentions, that they're identified and that the culture is made clear that this is not what we tolerate. I know that most people talk about leadership as if it's it's a very easy word. We all need to be leaders. But what is leadership exactly? I like simple definitions, so I don't want to make it too complex. But in light of the challenges that we're facing today, I think leadership is very much about being able to empower people, to influence them in ways that, with the right values, with the right direction, and that's where they pick it up. You have to give them an ownership. That's the empowerment. So leaders, the glorious past of a leader, that's the past, to say so, the glorious leader. The leader is facilitating, is influencing, but not everyone is able to do this. Fortunately, we can train many of these things, and that's what we do in our leadership certificate as well. Some people may say, yeah, but we have enough leaders. I mean, if you look at so many management positions we have, so many managers out there, and I would say that's the beginning. That kind of thinking is the beginning of our leadership problem in itself. Let's see, what does management mean? If you look at most company cultures, I would say they're characterized by this. So what you see there is a box. I don't think I'm saying something new when I say all of us in our jobs, we have a box to tick. Which means many of our collaborations, many of our work exchanges are based on the fact, how can you help me to tick my box? And most cultures, that's why we call it, have become a ticking the box culture. As long as you satisfy the boxes, your focus is on the boxes, it's fine. That's how we think. And in order to make sure that that's the case, that's why we have managers. Because let's think about it. What do managers do? Managers basically manage the work of others. They make sure that you do your job. One participant in one of our classes then asked, but professor, what does a manager do then? Well, basically that's his job. You see, we're losing a lot of energy, a lot of abilities here if we stick to the management. I always like this phrase, we've always done it that way, the 7 most expensive words in business. For me, this aligns well with what management is today. This is how we do it. We have our boxes, we control, and we make sure that everyone sticks to this. When I'm describing this, I'm pretty sure that you're probably feeling now like, yes, I recognize it even in my job as well. And think about those moments. Are those moments where you feel passionate? Are those moments where you feel creative? Are those moments that you feel excited to create value? I think most people will say no. When I'm thinking about ticking my boxes, making sure that my manager knows what I'm doing, I'm not thinking about those things. And this is where we've arrived, and this is at a management-only culture. Consequences of a management-only culture for us are we stick to a status quo thinking because we're trying to do what we do best at, and we try to stick to it. A little bit in contrast with what we were trying to achieve here, transformation and innovation. There's also no judgment. What does that mean? Well, my experience has been if most people only focus on their targets, their box to tick, I see that people don't engage in deep thinking anymore. Basically, the rules and the boxes are doing the thinking. They set the targets, they set the goals. What do we need when it comes down to transformation and innovation? Like I said, leaders need people who can work with the values and the purpose that is put out there. You want employees who own their job and create value for that purpose. If we create a work climate where there's little judgment themselves, then we are not going to get any workforce that is taking the ideas that are out there up to the next step. I quite often refer to call centers. I suppose not many of you like to call centers. And I think there's a reason for that, no? You call them and you listen to someone. I mean, you're fortunate if there's a person there, but what do you listen to? You listen to a script. Most of them have a script. And we did a survey with people who had to call centers for their insurance. And we also asked them, did you feel that you were helped? And it was a staggering, less than 10% of people who felt they were helped. No one likes call centers. Because basically, they're reading a script, they're ticking their box. That's a culture that you're communicating with, but not really helping your specific problems. You don't feel that problems are solved and problems are taken up. So the result is, if you talk to these people in the call centers, of course, very little ownership, but you don't want to end up with teams where there's very little ownership. And I like this picture very much so. This reflects that people have no ownership. This person is responsible for putting a white line on the road there. You see there's some wood there. Probably it's not in his job description to remove the wood, so he goes around it. We have ineffectivity. When people don't own their job, there's no culture there to foster passion and the excitement about creating something of value. This is what we end up with. So we need more leaders, less managers. Many companies complain about this. We have too many managers, we have not enough leaders. And I think this is an old cry out. I mean, it's always been there. And some of you may say like, yeah, but I hear this all the time. I heard it 10 years ago, I heard it 20 years ago, and you hear it today again. It's true. It's an old cry, and we don't seem to solve it very well because for most people, leadership remains a fluid concept. But it's also wearing new clothes, I would say. It's a very important issue today in our global business that we still complain about that we have too many managers and not enough leaders. Because why is it wearing new clothes? Well, after the financial crisis, so many corporate failures in the first part of the 21st century, we're confronted with a challenge that we need to start thinking on the long term, that we need a sustainable business and at the same time is value driven. Those are the new clothes that we're putting on the same old question. So it's not that we just need leaders. We've had leaders in the past. They failed as well. We need a specific type of leader. We need to find people basically who can take up their leadership position in ways that they value, in ways where they see they can create value. My leadership certificate is very much focused actually on making sure that people can create the value that they have in them. Quite often we have people in positions that are creating value that they don't necessarily align with, they don't necessarily recognize, they don't necessarily embrace. I think that's a big starting point because we all know the old phrase, leadership is what happens when you're not around. In your leadership position, if you're not aligned with what you're advocating, what you embody, we have a problem. If you're not aligned with that, no one will recognize it. You can't be there every minute of the day, so don't expect that your team, your employees, the rest of the organization will act in ways that you've defined as your purpose if you can't work with that purpose. It's a very important challenge. Like this, this is actually the opposite. What can we do about this leadership course? I don't know. What do you think? Is there anyone we could ask? I think this summarizes it all. The leader is not around. You don't want your team to be left like this and saying like, I wonder about what kind of norms and purpose he's setting. So in order to study this a bit more, but also in order to transfer this knowledge, we've created this new leadership certificate of achievement by building on the idea of what we call platform leadership. Yeah, in today's economy, we talk a lot about platforms. When we talk about open innovation, companies put out knowledge there, people collaborate, different organizations create new startups, and this is how we share knowledge. We build platforms, or we have the online platforms where we bring customers together with suppliers directly. Platforms is a concept out there, but I think it also very much applies to what leaders do in their job. So what you can see in this figure is party one, party two are employees, team members, and you have the leader. What I see is that leaders are providing a certain input. The input, I'll come back to that later, is the purpose, the direction, the why, what we just talked about. Do you build the culture and the system that can facilitate the abilities and the talent of employees? Because think about this. Most of you probably hired people, or you're about to hire people. You probably pay them a salary as well. But if I ask most people, do you feel you're doing their job? A lot of people say yes. So you pay someone to do their job. That's not the idea. That's the thing. We need to do less to make that sure that they perform better. So leadership is really about how do you create situations where you make others perform better, because you find the right positions for them. You use their ownership. You build and create a culture that facilitates so that you do less. And I'll come back to that. For me, that's platform leadership. As a leader, you provide a platform built on a purpose where people sign in because they recognize that value, and then the magic happens because their talents are being used and they build those connections. So, leaders as a platform, what do we need? What do we need to focus on? And this is also the focus of our program, is first of all the values. What is the purpose of your organization? How do you create meaning? What will your leadership contribute to making that clear to the people who work with you, to the clients who buy from you, to the suppliers who supply to you? What is needed for that? Your values. They need to be clear. Purpose and values make that there's a path to follow as well. We have a vision. One thing that I want to add as well is quite often people think, oh, we have a clear purpose, so there's only one path to follow. That's not true. That's a mistake that we have in the West quite often. We think linearly. Okay, we do this, then we do this, we build on that knowledge and we move on. Sometimes you may have to go other ways. We need to have some agility there as well. A vision and agility can go together. That's something you have to realize. Of course, we also need ownership, like I said. People need to be empowered. They need to bring in their abilities. They need to be selected in right ways. And finally, you need to make sure that they connect. The way to do this, and this is something that's really based on our own research and our consultancy efforts, is how can leaders become perceived as trustworthy, make legitimate decisions, build a trust culture, a safety culture, where people connect. Where they connect and bring their ownership together, you create much more value. And it's a big challenge here, this one, the connection issue. So in a survey last year, CEOs worldwide were asked, what is an important leadership trait for you? And they all referred, there was one common concept there, which was connection. But at the same time, as this graph shows, when it comes down to people having confidence in their leaders, this can be politically, corporate, societal, it's just dropping. So we also have a problem that most of our organizations don't train our leaders in building trustworthy and safe cultures. So what is your role as leader? As I said, leadership is about making others perform better, so you have to do less. Now, the question is then, okay, I've done this, we work on the platform leadership, and it sounds very appealing. I do less, I get paid my salary, and others perform better. But that's not where it ends, of course. There's a function to doing less, because what do you do as a leader? This is where it makes the difference with management. Managers don't necessarily make people perform better. They make them perform better according to the box, but not in terms of the growth and the abilities they do. But they keep focusing on that only. Leaders at one point give confidence and let, as in the platform, let the value be created by those who bring their abilities together. As a leader, you need more time. You need the time to develop. You need the time to know the direction, the vision, to make sure that this culture stays there and that this culture is fueled from time to time. You built the platform. That's where you need the time. So it's not a holiday leadership here. That you do less means that you open up more opportunities and time to work on the platform that is actually the foundation of it. You identify new opportunities that are sustainable, competitive, and create value. And those will provide direction. You build trust to make decisions legitimate. So basically, you're working with a focus on the platform, the organization, to facilitate the people that you've hired. You see, that's a completely different story than what we started with, where the rational idea was, I hire these people with these 6 traits to make sure that they do the job. So, a true leader, the leader that we're looking for today, is first of all, has 3 really big characteristics. He's a generalist. He or she is a generalist in the sense that he or she knows what is happening, not only in terms of the people he or she knows, the teams, but also the position of the organization in the economy, the purpose there. At the same time, you have the overall, you're the all-rounder, but you need to integrate. You need to connect. You need to embody the value and the purpose that you have in order to be a catalyst of change. Because like we said, there's a transformative experience. We move constantly from one point to another point based on the purpose and the vision we've developed. Cultures are needed to make people agile in that sense. So those are your 3 challenges: a generalist, an integrator, and a catalyst of change. And platform leadership, in our view, is providing a framework to help train that. And this is what we do in the new leadership certificate. So it's 4 modules. It starts with the new leadership module, where we explain the philosophy, the reason why we need to focus on the old cry of more leaders, less managers, but with the new clothes on. And then we dissect each of these demands into 3 modules: leading in value-driven ways, the power of making trust work, and negotiating the context. So I hope that you liked what I just talked about. I hope that you also see the needs for this kind of leadership. And what is most important, there are 2 things there. You as a leader, you're not a leader if people don't follow you. So that's a responsibility. So in that responsibility, you try to make the most value out of it. And that's by making others perform better. Because it's a win-win. It's a cooperative situation. That will create the time for you to create value. And one important thing there is, and this is what I believe in a global economy, you can create value wherever on the planet. But you need to create the value that you can embrace. So in that sense, I've noticed many participants in our certificate also challenge themselves in terms of their career choices. Some of them are middle managers. Some of them are already much higher on the management ladder. And still they challenge themselves as, is this where I'm creating my value? Thank you.
That was terrific food for thought, David. Very
Thank
comprehensive, and lots of room for our audience to participate. And we do have a question here from someone ask about executive level leadership compared to leadership at other levels of the organization. I assume that leadership's important at every level, but how would it differ between those levels?
That's a good question. Of course, we have different levels. We look at organizations as hierarchical, as the question already demonstrates as well. There are pluses and negatives to that one, I would say. First of all, we have a striving more to, when I talk about ownership, in a way to let things go a little bit as well. You have to give trust in order to get trust back and get the best out of people. So in that sense, less focus on hierarchy is essential in that aspect. But of course, hierarchy is there, and on different levels you have different responsibilities. So most of the things that I talked about I see are very useful definitely for middle management, for people moving into general management and going up to the executive level. Like I said, they're all challenged with these questions. Let's say the top, the C-suite, or maybe CEOs, of course, they're confronted with other decisions in the sense that there are different layers between them in connecting with sometimes the workforce that you would like to influence. One thing to realize there is that every layer in a company has a function. So if you're on the top, it's still important. Research shows time over time, despite the fact that we like self-management teams, the tone of the top still sets the culture. And the reason why is, as many of you know, if you want to have projects approved, which are challenging, maybe changing some part of the culture, if it's not seen as perceived, if it's not perceived as being supported by the top, no one believes in it. The legitimacy is not there. So I would say that the issues about responsibility, embodiment, purpose are the most important at the top. If that's lacking, it's never going to happen in a company. Having said that, in my personal experience as well, in terms of when I coach CEOs in transformation processes, they have exactly the same fear sometimes when it comes down to taking up a leadership position, just like a middle manager does. I take up a leadership position, and at the end of the day, it comes down to meaning. That process is basic. How do you craft a meaningful position? That's the same across every layer I've seen. Because of your responsibilities and your other demands, depending on the hierarchy, some people express it, some people don't express it. So that, I want to share one tip with that. People quite often say the higher you go, you don't show weaknesses. But you have to think about this. If you don't show weaknesses, our research shows you don't come across as human. And what is even worse, if you don't show up weaknesses, people make up weaknesses for you. Those you can't control. The weaknesses you do show and provide meaning with, you put it in a context, those are the ones you can control.
I was taken, David, by your comment about the 7 horrible words of business, we've always done it this way. How does an effective leader challenge that without, in effect, undermining, even trashing the organization? How do you keep respect for the people and what they've done while also encouraging them to do things differently?
I think that's a great question because, like many things in life, it's about the balancing here. You want to, I mean, one thing that I think very ambitious entrepreneurs, and if you see movies with the glorious leader, one thing we would like to do is like we throw away everything we have and we change it completely. That's never a good recipe for success, I would say. So how do you do that? How do you respect the things that are out there, but just make them better? So, and I think that's the emphasis, how to make it better. I think that's the philosophy, that's the mindset a leader should have, rather than just criticizing. Because this is also a perceptual problem. If you're in a leadership position and you criticize, usually that's made very personal against you. So that's something that you have to remember in terms of impression management. A second thing is, what I would say is, and this concerns everything when you're voicing, basically, when you're trying to challenge something, is always use the perspective of the ones you want to persuade to put the problem in. Outline consequences for them, saying like, look, what would be the consequences? Do you like those? No, I don't like those. Okay, can we change that? People will more likely say, yeah, we want to change those things. Then you can bring in and say like, but how do we do this? One solution could be this or this. So in a sense, it's a pretty indirect process. But I think the good leaders do their homework. They already analyzed completely the weaknesses and the strengths and know which strengths they want to pull out and sell to the others. But the second part of it is, I think you need to take the perspective. Research shows that when we negotiate with other people, 95% of the time we only think about the goals that we want to achieve. And people forget about the goals the other want to achieve. So, but sometimes indirectly, it's much better to play the goals of the other first to get in what you want. Yeah.
David, you mentioned the various modules, so I wanted to ask you about some of them. In negotiations, how can you lead in negotiations? It seems to be a bit of a contradiction in terms because negotiations is give and take. So how do you lead and also negotiate?
Well, it's a little bit in a similar way that I described earlier when I said, okay, you can hire people based on your personality and that's it. You let them free and that's it. It doesn't work like that. You, as a leader, you design the platform, you design the culture, look at the systems that fit with that culture. In a similar way, it's with negotiations. One thing most people forget is at least 50% of the success of your negotiation depends on your homework, your preparation. And your preparation essentially is about understanding the context of the negotiation. Because I'll use the word table as a metaphor of negotiations. Most people arrive at the negotiation and they work what is on the table. Basically, they work with what they see. Because people haven't prepared enough, they don't work with the things they don't see. A lot of people always tell me, how can I work with something I don't see? Well, that's preparation. So, same thing in a negotiation. When I say you can lead or be in charge of your negotiation, what we do in that module is we point out how to set a stage, for example, that people will think more in terms of your interests, one thing. Another thing is try to set a stage where you know that because of your preparation, you also know what people are looking for and use that knowledge to give them the feeling that they also achieve what they want to achieve, but not in a way that it violates basically your interests. Win-wins are are necessary, but they can also be achieved. The only way a win-win can be achieved, however, is by what we call enlarging the pie. So, when we say there's a fixed pie, means we only work with the information we know, with the information we see, and that's what we work with. Leading a negotiation is enlarging the pie and then strategically using it so that the other party does feel, I've achieved my goals, but in the same time you've created so much more value that we will definitely get yours and more.
In leadership and negotiations, are there certain biases that leaders suffer from, and if so, how do you surmount them?
Well, that's an essential part of our course, and we see this throughout all the modules, the rationality, irrationality. So people suffer from a lot of biases, but just two interesting ones, because there's a whole list there. First one is what we call an agreement bias. So it's very funny. If you say the word negotiations, a lot of people think right away about, uh-oh, I have to win this. Negotiations quite often is very competitive. They feel the pressure. They get tensed. If you ask people, quite often most people describe it in negative emotions. They feel pressure. So you can imagine that people are very relieved when they feel, oh, I've made an agreement. So the problem there is, because we experience those negative emotions, we anticipate a lot of pressure. We have such relief when we get an agreement. People tend to go to an agreement way too quickly and lose so much value. And not only for yourself, but actually for both parties. So we're already happy to have an agreement. So this is one thing you need to realize, and this is what we focus on in the course. So how to build up that momentum to make it optimal for you. A second one is what we call the winner's curse. Is because we are nervous, anxious about negotiations, we like to get an agreement pretty quickly. And if we get one, we always feel bad about it usually. Just think about it like you walk into a shop, you want to buy something for your wife, some nice earrings. You see, oh, the price is pretty high. You ask, well, I'll give 60% of the price. And the guy says right away, done. And here's an extra necklace for free. How many of you will feel happy? I don't think anyone will, because you'll only feel like, I think I've done a bad deal, despite you got what you wanted. But you felt, afterwards, the behavior of the other shows clearly, yes, you still paid way too much. So those are two tendencies that drive us without us being aware of it.
David, this has been really fascinating. Thank you very much. We've been speaking to David de Kramer, professor at Cambridge Judge Business School, University of Cambridge, about leadership.